Welcome back to Where the Ramp Ends. I'm Bryce.
And I'm Summer.
And today on Where the Ramp Ends, we have Meske Owens and Senator Julia Kirt. Welcome to Where the Ramp Ends. We are so excited to have you guys today.
Glad to be here.
Hi. We're so thankful you guys joined us today. And I'm just going to give you each a minute to introduce yourself. Miski, you want to start? And then we'll go to the senator.
Thanks, Summer. Um, I am Meske Owens, and I actually know Bryce and Summer from Partners in Policymaking.
Yes.
Gosh, it's been over a year that we graduated. I'm a mom of 5. I've got 3 little ones still at home that all have disabilities, and I'm just navigating all the things, figuring it out.
I'm Senator Julia Kirt. I'm Miski's senator, so that's the most important part of my bio here. And then I've been in office for 8 years. I'm the Senate Minority Leader. I came out of running nonprofit arts organizations, but have always been an advocate for people with disabilities. My brother has a genetic disorder, has always been physically limited and in a wheelchair most of his life, and so I, from a very early age, got pretty aware of lack of accessibility in our communities and have spent a lot of time working on developmental disabilities wait list issues and then other accessibility issues. My son's on the autism spectrum, just graduated from high school. So I've been navigating the whole transition into adulthood for him. And that's added a new layer to my policy making for sure.
And you also are a Partners in Policymaking grad. And you also help out with the process with our final test each year, the mock trial, and I know that's really appreciated, your participation
Yeah, I
in
didn't
that.
get to do partners in policymaking. I kind of wish I'd known about it before I got in office, but I've just been kind of a groupie. I come to
Okay,
any of the closing events, and um, I think Representative Ellen Hefner may be the only legislator who's
okay.
gone through the program, and of course, she's taught me so much. And then I've had constituents who went through the program. Like, if I knock on their door and they know the good questions to ask, they end up being a partners in policymaking grad for sure.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of why you've joined us today. We're going to talk about the
Mhm.
importance of people in the disability community voting and participating in that process and give us some really good tips from your perspective. And then Miski's going to join in on that conversation also. So we just really look forward to this conversation. Um, so for listeners who may not be very familiar with the state government, can you explain why state level elections matter so much to people with disabilities and their families?
Boy, state government's making a lot of decisions that impact our day to day lives. I mean, everything from transportation infrastructure to a lot of the guardrails for schools. Lots and lots of funding decisions, of course, because the federal government leaves a lot of those decisions in our hands. Everything from waivers to decisions about Medicaid are made at the state level. I think also we've seen other states that have been very proactive for supporting constituents and residents with disabilities, and I think that's a choice made at the state level. In other states, they might be additional protections, additional services, or outreach or advocacy that happens for people with disabilities. But definitely at the state level, a lot of that is where the rubber meets the road for the laws and for how things get implemented.
So many self advocates want to participate in the political process, but feel overwhelmed by all the information or might get overstimulated on who to vote for or, what issues are most important. What are some ways to kind of get more voters more informed and a little bit more comfortable with the voting process?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, we as a state have not made it a priority to have nonpartisan information about our elections. Some states do voter guides that are sent to every resident, that kind of stuff. Our state has not been willing to do that kind of stuff. So it does leave it very much in your own hands.
Right.
There are some great nonpartisan places to learn about candidates. My two personal favorites are the League of Women Voters, who consistently put out nonpartisan information. And then there's a group called Ballotopia, which is like Ballotopedia. It's like Wikipedia for elections. I can't say it right. If you look up elections information, you will end up on their website. And that's maintained by volunteers, but it's totally neutral, lists people and lists their websites if they have them. I mean, the number one thing is knowing what elections are happening in your own district. And our Oklahoma State Election Board website is your resource for that. So if you go to ok.gov/elections and you put in your name and birth date, you can pull up your own voter profile. And at that location, you'll see all the districts you vote in, and it'll show you a sample ballot if one's available. So for next week's primaries, there's going to be a sample ballot sitting there that shows you exactly what you're going to see in the voting booth. I think that's a great resource, especially if there's a lot of things on the ballot or if you're overwhelmed. You can print that off and you can go ahead and mark it and have your sample ballot with you to help you when you go in and fill out your real ballot. If you're doing a mail-in ballot, which is something we may want to talk about separately, um, you could do the same. You could have a sample ballot and be filling that in. And the other thing I want people to know, while I don't want you skipping races, you do not have to vote on every race. So I think sometimes people feel overwhelmed because they're like, well, I don't know about the county assessor's race or whatever. You actually don't have to choose on every single race if that's important to you. You could just pick governor, superintendent, and your legislative candidates or your federal candidates and skip those others if you feel strongly that you don't feel ready. But I gotta say, there's a lot of people out there who vote with zero information. So if you're even trying to gather information, you're doing a lot more than most constituents, most voters out there. My first election, I had a primary, and the person who ran against me did nothing. Like literally didn't go meet people, didn't send out mail, didn't even make a website. And he still got like 15% of the vote. And I just thought, well, how did people decide to vote for him if they never heard from him, never found out anything about him? But I think sometimes people just go through and let those bubble. So
Right.
I just wanna encourage people that you may feel like you need to be the most important person, but you're okay.
So, would you say it's better to not mark that bubble than to mark it uninformed?
I feel like that's the voter's choice. I
Yeah.
do think it's risky if you're voting on ones where you've done 0, you don't know anything about the, person. I see a lot of folks who straight party vote in our state, and I worry about that because I
Mhm.
think that implies that you understand exactly what those person's values are. And really, there's no test, there's no litmus test if you file. So, like when I filed to run, I had to file where I live and the party that I had been in for 6 months, right? So, that's my partisan listing on that ballot. That doesn't mean anyone checked me out to make sure I fit those categories. But that's usually what people do if they're not confident. They'll do a straight party vote or they'll pick by party, and that is a choice if you wanna make it. It's just not the most informed choice for sure.
Right. So, what are some of the biggest disability related issues currently being discussed um, in Oklahoma that voters should be paying attention to?
Well, of course, one of my biggest concerns is at the federal level, there's a lot of potential cuts or limits around home-based waivers, community-based waivers, and any of our issues for folks who need direct care. I'm very worried about those cuts and how they're gonna impact people's access to the care they need. Um, that will get applied at the local level. If they end up giving us what they call block grants, which is where the federal government just gives us a block of money instead of dictating each service that we provide, then it's up to the state leaders to decide what we're going to offer and what we're going to allow. That worries me a lot. The other big thing I see is special education. The federal government is basically dismantled the offices that took care of complaints about special ed and the enforcement of our IDEA law. And so that's going back on the states. And we've asked again and again, and my colleagues contend that, the law is still in place, the schools are still required, but any of us know who've tried to advocate in the schools for um, accommodations or the kind of help we need if we or our loved ones have disabilities. I mean, schools are stretched, and you sometimes really have to push and have the law with you to get what you need for your kiddo or for yourself.
Yeah.
Um, I'm really worried if that goes to the state level and we don't have in place mediators or legal help. The federal government has been that backstop, right? Our we passed a law this year that was pretty minimal to make sure that it was clear that most states have their own state law that mimics the IDEA law to enforce it at the state level. We didn't have that. They did pass, and actually, I need to check if the governor signed it. A very minimal one of those that's going to have um, just basic protections written in there. But I would sure love to see that more thorough. And I would be advocating to anyone in leadership at whether they're the state superintendent or the state legislators, to strengthen that. And that's the big one. Our state superintendent of education is getting elected this year, and that's a huge opportunity to have somebody in place who really focuses on and supports students with disabilities across the state. I mean, to me, that would be, if they want to talk about radical transformation for the well being of our schools, if we really supported kids who have additional needs and identified earlier what those needs are, I think we'd see a major transformation of our schools. I think it'd be better for everyone, not only the kids, but also their classmates and the teachers. Because right now we do a lot of kicking the can down the road and not supporting as well as we could. If we had a state superintendent who prioritized that, and right now on the election, the voters are the ones that are going to tell them what matters. Election years are the best time to push your priorities because anyone who's looking for votes is listening better. And I don't mean that cynically. I just mean this is the year when they really have to listen because they're trying to make
Or they
sure that
should be.
that voters. Yeah, right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Um, yeah, just kind of like as you were saying that, Miski and I just got back from Washington, D.C., and one of the things that we were advocating for was that IDEA be fully funded at. Um, and that's one thing that we talked about a lot is how beneficial it is for kids with disabilities to be in the mainstream classroom, not
Mhm.
just for kids with disabilities, but for typical kids. We just had Patrick Schwartz on here who he said there's absolutely zero studies that show that separation is better, but we need that funding in order to help make that happen. Um, so that was, just as you were saying that, that's what I'm thinking about. And I've been
Well,
talking
go
to those people that are running in my district and really stressing like we public education really needs to be strengthened and supported because that's the basis of our community. That's you can't you can't draw businesses or draw people into your community if you don't have a
Right.
strong public education.
Exactly. And, me living with cerebral palsy, I've told this in Partners in Policy Making, if I was able-bodied, I have a degree in enterprise development, and then I have my public speaking certifications, and I have several life coaching certifications. If I was able-bodied, I'd be making well over 6 figures now. But since I have cerebral palsy and don't have the and people don't really give me the chance to, share my story and share my message, I'm not able to have the full-time career that I want to without losing the benefits that I have so it's kind of like a double-edged sword. I want to have a full-time career like everybody else, but at the same time, I don't wanna lose the guaranteed benefits I already have because I'm not quite sure that society would give me an opportunity, really.
Well, that's a great point. I mean, I think when you talk about our mainstream classrooms and making sure that people with disabilities are integrated into those, that's also about the able-bodied kids and the kids that don't have disabilities interacting on a regular basis.
Sure.
I'm really worried our class sizes continue to be too big. And so that is one of the burdens that's hard on people with disability and it's hard on educators.
Yes.
And then I see parents, they're scared for their kids. They want their kid to be safe. And if their kid is having behavioral issues or has specific challenges where they need extra help and they're not getting it, they're leaving the public school system with our voucher program and, I'm not blaming those parents. They're trying to keep their kiddos safe, and we all have to make those choices. But what's happening to those kids left behind? I know in Oklahoma City public schools where my son went, it's something like 20+% of kids have IEPs. And I think and it's not just easy situations to deal with. And we have to give the additional support that's needed to support
Yes,
those students.
yes.
Were we not supposed to have something with, the casinos and I mean, isn't there some kind of, funding that was supposed to be come from that towards education? Did I dream that?
Quite
I,
sure.
I don't think I know what you mean.
I think maybe when the lottery I think
Lottery. I mean, I still think tribal I mean, I know in Colorado, like, the lottery and all that stuff was a big thing change for
Yeah, the
education
lottery
there
only
when
makes
I was in school, so
I think the profits are just not what folks dreamed of or what they advertised when they passed it. So, I think it maybe 30 million. I mean, really the profits are not that high. And so also during that time, we have not increased general revenue to schools at the rate we need to. So we just haven't kept up with inflation. We were so far behind. And while the legislature made some big bumps, like right after the walkout, they haven't backed that up every year. Right. So
Right.
this year, my colleagues are touting how they, made historic investments, but literally a dollar more would be historic. But percentage wise, it's not significant. It's not enough to make real change. And what we see is, our experienced educators are leaving, and that's true nationwide. There's a teacher pipeline problem across the country, but ours is really pronounced. And you're seeing special ed classrooms or people who are in classrooms who have zero child development training. That is going to hurt our kids with disabilities the most because if you don't have
100%.
people who can identify what they need and serve them well, it's going to be worse for them. And so retaining veteran teachers, mentoring teachers well is our job at the state level to support districts in that.
How can voters learn where candidates stand on disabilities without relying on campaign ads or social media posts?
Yeah, that's a great question. You can email or call the candidate directly. Their website should have a way to contact them. I really encourage folks. I know it's not convenient, but if there's any way you can go to any town halls or candidate forums that happen in your community, if there's a local chamber that hosts a panel of legislators, or if there's a virtual event, attend that and ask those questions. I think if it's email, if it's phone, if it's in person, any of those ways will remind them that they have constituents with disabilities and constituents who care about it.
Yes.
You might not get a real robust response. They may not have a full fleshed out plan, but you can push for it, right? I think that's true all the way up and down the line. Our federal delegation, they're incredibly important if they know or don't know about what folks need. I remember a couple years ago talking to Senator Langford, a U.S. senator who really just didn't have a good sense of the community home waivers and how big an issue that is for people in our state. We constantly have to be reminding them that it matters among all the many issues they're looking at.
can you give maybe a few example questions if you reach out to somebody that's running in your district, um, when you reach out to them, some sample questions, what you could ask them to get an idea of what kind of legislator they would be?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would do is just tell a little about yourself. Like your story matters and your experience matters. So I would say, I'm Julia Kirt. I'm a mom of a 18-year-old with autism, and here's some of the things that we've been dealing with. So give them a little sense of some of the challenges you're facing, and then just say, like, what do you know about the special education system, and how could you make that a priority? And just ask them. You're giving them a little context for why it matters to you, and then you can this is conversational. It doesn't have to be. You're not prepping debate questions, so don't worry about being perfect, right? So I would say, what do you think, or what do you know about supporting people with disabilities in our community? What do you know about Medicaid and how it relates to people being able to work and get support? I think ask them those questions, and if they know nothing, that's your chance to say, like, I want to be a resource for you. I want you to know about this. Like, I'll tell you my experience. I'm glad to send you information because you want immediately to be the person they turn to when they have
Mm,
questions. You don't
absolutely.
need to be grilling them. You need to be getting them to want to listen to you, right? And so my encouragement would be just to make it more conversational and offer to follow up if they don't know. Instead of saying, "Well, that's embarrassing, you should know," tell them, "This needs to be important to you. You have lots of constituents that this is gonna matter to. This matters to the economy. This matters to education. This matters to health." And tell them, "I want you to learn about this." So I had a constituent, for an example, I had a voter in my district who really thinks that solar energy is gonna fix the whole world, right? So this is his, like, number one issue. He's like, "Everything we do," he's like, "We could be using solar for this." And I know nothing about solar, right? So I just was like, "Thanks for telling me." But he did not let up. Like, he kept asking me and pushing me, and then when I got into office, I already had that in mind, and then he would ask me like, "Okay, well, what are the schools doing about adding solar?" And it made it where it became a question I regularly ask, something I regularly think about, and it made me learn about it because I knew he was gonna check
Mm,
in with me and make sure I wasn't clueless anymore. So I think use it as an opportunity, and if somebody, for example, if you end up in that conversation with a candidate and they're dismissive to you, or they don't care, or they clearly aren't gonna listen to you, that gives you your answer right there.
right.
If they truly are willing to learn, that's step 1 at least, right?
Yeah.
And then I would ask them if they have any experience. Just, do you have any experience in your life of people with disabilities? Because I know what we found. Representative Ellen Hefner has done a lot of just figuring out who in our legislature has a relative with disabilities, because those folks are immediately bigger champions. And so ask them that. Do you have anyone in your life with disabilities? And I think that's your way to begin that conversation. You don't have to have like the perfect question. I don't think.
I like that because it helps you that helps you make your decision, but it's also the beginning of very important relationship.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
those relationships are um, really important in making sure that our voices are heard.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, and I think that can be intimidating. I know when I was an advocate and I was outside this building, people would say, "You need to have a relationship with your legislators." And I was like, "How does that
100% you
happen?"
do. Yes.
But it happens like any relationship. It starts with a conversation. It starts with introductions. And that introduction might just be you telling your story and be like, and even telling them, like, I think up front for people to know that you're a partners in policymaking grad, they don't know anything about that program, I guarantee it. And so suddenly you've introduced them to this whole like resource that they didn't know about.
I think the problem, Senator, is a lot of people think that just because you're a representative that they get intimidated by that. They're like, "Oh, they're a representative. They're not a normal person like I am. They're doing big boy and big girl things, and they're not real people." We all put on our socks one foot at a time. You got to remember that
Mm,
these
yeah.
representatives and your constituents were all the same. We
Amen. Amen. Well, and if they act like they're holier than thou, that gives you a whole lot of information there too.
right,
Because
right,
we do have,
absolutely, 100%,
yeah,
100%.
there's some representatives and senators who do think that they're too busy, too important to talk to people. Well, I'm sorry, that's your job. And so if they're doing that in a
Right,
campaign, I would have concerns about that.
right.
How they're going to govern if they don't listen to people, you know?
one thing, and I'll ask the next question, but one thing going through partners in policy making, something that just like occurred to me that I'd never really thought about is how many decisions, how many like bills are going through each year.
Yes,
You as legislators have thousands, hundreds
Hmm.
and thousands of bills to make decisions on. And their decisions on, farming, education,
Hmm.
medical, and you no one is an expert in all of those
Right.
areas. And so it's
And there's no training for,
and
like,
there's
how to do your
Zero
job.
training.
Right.
But that's
Right.
why it's so important for constituents to reach out and
Yeah, I think
make our
people
voices
assume
heard.
that we're hearing from folks on every bill, and that's just not true. Like this, whether you like it or not, the way our system works up here is people file a lot of bills, and that's kind of encouraged in our political system. And so it's pretty overwhelming. And so, like, I only research the ones that are going to come before committees that I am in or on the floor. But like, never assume that your legislators already know everything.
Right.
And you don't have to treat them like they're dummies, but I have a lot of people that educate me while they're advocating. So I don't know about wind energy. So like if somebody calls and they care about a bill, I'm like, tell me why, and
Yeah.
I want that information. And best case scenario, you become someone they turn to if they have questions. So
Right.
very early on when I was campaigning, I got invited by Wanda Felty to a
Oh, I love
disability
Wanda.
waiting list meeting. And Wanda's such a great advocate. One of the reasons she is because she's inviting people in constantly. Like she wants them to learn. I mean, I didn't know anything. And then I had somebody to turn to with questions to understand things. And that network helped me have people I could ask about DHS issues or Medicaid issues. So, and then I also helped advocate for the issues. So I think that you can both be the one informing them and helping make the policy if you start those relationships. She's somebody who I can text and send a bill to. She
Yes.
and Roseanne Duplan are my go-tos for like if there's a bill that I'm like, how does this impact us? I have that for other issues. Like I have one constituent who cares a whole lot about wildlife and hunting issues. Well, I am not. This is not my area. I know nothing, right? And
Right.
I just said to him, he cares a lot. He kept calling me, and I just said, "Are you willing to look at bills when I don't know what?" And so I'll send him a bill at 9 p.m. that I'm hearing the next morning, and just say, "What do you think?" And I rely pretty heavily on his opinion because he's the one in my district who's really pushing on it, right?
Yeah. We just did a podcast with Ricky Sabia, who is with the National Down Syndrome Congress. We were talking like after the podcast, and I said sometimes it feels like legislators don't care. And I feel like a lot of people feel that way, and she said but we have to remember it's not that legislators don't care, they just don't always understand, and it's our job to make sure that they understand, that they hear
Yes.
our stories. My next question is, I want Miski to kind of talk on this also because I'll let her kind of talk a little bit about the possibility of, Rev Up coming to Oklahoma, but I want both of you to talk on this. So people often hear that their vote matters, but sometimes it feels like one vote won't make a difference. Have you seen examples where civic engagement truly influence policy decisions?
So have I seen advocacy matter on policymaking? Is that the basic question?
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, um, no question. Sometimes it's slow. A lot of times it's slower than people want it to be. I know, for instance, with the waiting list, we had thousands and thousands of people waiting for services, and it took
Mhm.
years of
Mhm.
advocacy to make that a priority. One of the things in politics is creating urgency because there are so many potential issues for us to be working on, right? And so there's a variety of ways that urgency is, I'll say, generated in the political system. Sometimes it's something that's a big issue nationally, and that's creating an urgency to voters um, for that. They're watching national news, and so that suddenly they care for that to happen locally. Another way is for paid lobbyists to be generating that urgency. So they're working for someone, an association or a business, and they're coming up here saying something's really important to change. And then the other way is really from advocates pushing that urgency. And so it's not easy, but it creates that political will to actually change something. I mean, we're talking about changing the law. And so it does take uh, some momentum to make that happen. But I will just go back to the waiting list issue because what you had was thousands of people who were consistently informing themselves about what was going on with the system, who were watching the lack of progress at the Department of Human Services for serving folks, the long gap that was happening between someone when they might go on the waiting list and actually get those services, and especially that gap after public education ends and before services started, people are left in a huge crisis. Families having to quit work, people not having access to care, or going into institutions unnecessarily. And I think it took a lot of people telling those stories and also pointing out the financial challenges of those crises, how it actually does cost the state more when people come onto waivers in an emergency situation versus, a chosen transition, right? And that took years, and it took building up more and more champions. Like, I don't know if y'all have ever met Erin Taylor, but she's an incredible advocate who used to run Partners in Policymaking. She just, from the very day that Representative John Eccles entered the legislature, she was in his ear. She was his constituent. She was calling him. She was making him be a champion on it. And it took multiple members like that getting pushed to be champions for us to make that progress we needed to. And then finally, it just got put in the budget. You know, the year that it happened, we had gotten a couple of bumps financially to help serve more people. But when they finally decided to do that, we were having good financial times as a state. And they're just everything lined up with the advocates and Republican leaders suddenly decided it was a good feel good moment for them to end the wait list. And so it became this like political win for them. And it just happened to be something that we really needed to happen. Now, did they do it the way we wanted? No. They didn't really, as usual, they didn't really think through the implementation of it, the challenge of they didn't take seriously the concerns parents brought up about providers and how there's not enough direct care providers to serve the community, etc. But still, they added a whole lot of money to the budget to make sure that got covered on an ongoing basis. That was a huge win, like the kind of thing that takes a decade to build. So absolutely, I've seen it. I've seen it in smaller ways too. I mean, I'll give just one real simple example. I had a constituent write me. They were a therapeutic foster care family who serves kids in the foster care system who have medical frailties or disabilities. And there were a couple of changes of policy that were causing financial hardship for them. And so when they first wrote me, I kind of was like, I don't understand what they want me to do. But then I realized what they were talking about were internal policies the agency had changed. They changed how they were reimbursing for mileage to medical appointments, and they had stopped covering gloves, rubber, like the gloves that were needed, latex gloves for when they were changing their loved ones that they were caring for. And to me, that may not seem like a huge deal, but to this family, it was causing real financial problems. And I just sent a message to the healthcare authority and asked them, like, did this policy change? Like, why are they suddenly having to pay for this? And they were like, oh, this was a misinterpretation. They came back, they fixed it for everyone. So here was something where just because this constituent was frustrated and reached out to me, I was able to get the agency to fix something that helped other folks. And no, it didn't change the world overnight, but it was a little bit of relief for these families who were providing this care.
Yeah, that's amazing. And Miski, I want you to talk a little bit about because in DC we learned about the numbers of people with disabilities that vote and their loved ones, and I was actually astounded um, by those numbers. And do you want to talk a little bit on that?
Yeah, I was too. In fact, I went when we got home, I went back and I looked him up and researched, not that I thought that they were giving us misinformation, but I just thought, I mean, that seems like a lot. I mean, it was, um, but the fact is that people with disabilities make up the largest minority group in America, 1 in 4 adults, which is so much bigger than most people realize. And disability issues are still treated like niche issues instead of mainstream. 25% of the population, that's a lot. That's a
Yeah.
big part of, and so that their vote matters. If all of those people with disabilities voted at the same rate as people without disabilities, things would look a lot different. I think that, but the access and I mean, transportation, and there's so many issues with,
Mm.
um, voting, people, accessible polling places, and just all of those thing, even how they read or see or write, their ballot or how that's presented to them is can be a problem sometimes. So, and just because we have accessible laws in place doesn't mean that that's what it looks like in real life. Um,
Mm.
so that's but 1 in 4 Americans has a disability, some kind of disability. So, um,
That's that's so empowering for to me to hear that, because sometimes it feels like the disability community has such a small voice, but really we don't.
No,
Because
we
then
don't.
you also have to consider that 1 in 4 have a disability, but then also think about their their loved ones and the people in their household that are also voting, and so that number even goes up from there.
right, right.
So
Well, I think a lot of times also people don't consider mental health and things like
No.
ADHD or autism. Even there may not be physical disabilities that are not obvious, but there's a lot of other mental health conditions or
Uh-huh.
chronic illnesses that um, learning disabilities, sensory disabilities that qualify as a disability. So
And
I
unfortunately,
actually think the number could be larger than 1 in 4.
right,
Um, it's just reporting
right.
wise that we don't have those numbers. So yeah, I think the ADA is only 36 years old. That was another thing that is pretty surprising to me. Um, is that people assume that disability rights have always existed. They've always been in place, and that's not the truth at all. I mean,
90.
1990 was
Yes.
the yeah. So I mean, that's a lot of within a lot of our lifetime. I mean, they have not been in place as long as we have been alive.
Right.
That's pretty surprising, I think, to a lot of people. And just, I also think that some of the way that we get through to people and help educate people is to say things like this, things that people assume had just always been around. They assume because we have a law, that's just the way it happens. That's not the case, but they don't know what they don't know. So whether that's legislators, whether that's the public, whether that's people campaigning for the first time that really don't know, they don't have any a loved one with a disability. I think just having a conversation, the more we talk about it, is important because they don't know what they don't know.
Mhm.
Everybody, and that goes for everybody. And us included. I think Summer and I learned a whole lot in DC that even being in the disability community, um, we still don't know it all. There's still so much to learn, and it takes a village of people to get
Yes.
together and say, we want to educate people. We want to educate people within our own community, and we want to keep talking. We want to keep bringing these issues to our members of Congress to make sure that they understand, what
Mhm.
our daily lives look like because they really don't know what our daily lives look like. They really don't.
Well, and
Amen.
I think having, like, helping people have a vision that things can be better too. I mean, that's a challenge because for folks who don't know and they haven't seen our community, 36 years in with ADA, I mean, we're barely getting started. There's a whole lot of places in our state that are still um, on legacy where they don't have, you talk about end of the ramp, off the ramp, they don't have accessible entrances still. I mean, it's shocking to me how much we still don't have the accessibility, much less the awareness. And I think you're right. That awareness is huge part of it.
Yeah. So I want to bring up that I have Rev Up gave us an audit kit, an audit toolkit for your polling place.
Nice.
They've realized that there's so many there can be so many complications with people getting to the polls to vote, whether that's transportation or actually there getting into that it's accessible, that they have all of the accommodations that they need, and that the poll workers know what those things are, that they know, how to
Hmm.
use them and where they're found. And so they have a kit where you can and anybody can do this. You go take it with you to the whenever you go to vote, and you basically audit your polling place, and then you send it to them, and um, it helps them with data to figure out where they really need to focus some effort, to try to get some of those things taken care of for people so that they are able to go and vote.
What advice would you give to a first-time voter with a disability who wants to be involved with their, representatives, but isn't sure where to start?
I mean, the big thing I would be to figure out who you're represented by now and if they're running again, because they're going to have an official office that you can reach out to. And that could be you decide how much you want that to be. Do you want that to be an email to them? Do you want to ask them to meet up, have coffee or whatever works for you? Have a phone call. That is you can invite them. If I had in an ideal world, I would say ask them to have a Zoom with you or a call with you to get introduce yourself and ask them where they stand on stuff. That is not an unreasonable request, and they can always, downgrade it to a smaller meeting or send me an email if they're not responsive. But if they really want to connect with you, this time period is the time to do it. So we are not in the Capitol daily. We don't have Capitol business officially until February. So now is the time to do it. This summer and fall are the best times to reach out. If they're candidates, I would email them or call them and ask to have a chat to tell your story and see how they're going to learn about issues that matter to you.
Where do people get that, contact information for them? Because they don't have to provide that when they, um
I mean, if you want to be a super geek, you can go on the elections website. People have to file ethics forms that have phone numbers on them. But you can just go through their campaign, either Facebook or website, and click the contact us number. A lot of them have phone numbers as well, though. But I would try emailing and just make it a simple. You don't need to give them your whole life story. Just like I'd like to set up a 10-minute phone call to talk to you about some issues that matter to me. And I mean, I think it's ideal to request an appointment because that puts it on them to show up for you. But the great thing is that we're not talking about a lot of people. So maybe you have a candidate for representative, House of Representative that's at the state level. Maybe you might have every House of Representative is up for office this year. That's 2-year terms, so they're all up this year. They don't all have races, but they're all up. And then half the state senate is up this year. So we alternate. We have 4-year terms, and so every other year, every other cycle, you have half the legislature up. So you may not have a race in all those, and then you may have everybody in Oklahoma has a congressional race and a U.S. senator race. If you want to do all those, great. I would say just start with your House and your state Senate. That would be a great place to start. That might mean only making one appointment. Um, or if you want to talk to all the candidates, they'll be filtered through next week, though. Hopefully, people will be filtering them down. So June 16th, Tuesday, is the primary, which is the initial primary, and there's only primaries for Republicans and Democrats. There's no primary for Libertarians, and unfortunately, this year independents don't get to vote in the primaries. That is a state law right now. And then there'll be the state question for the minimum wage, increasing the minimum wage. And then in August, we'll see any primary runoff. So that will still be partisan elections in August, and the general elections in November, where everybody's on the ballot.
So we've kind of touched on accessibility, and you've kind of talked about, Oklahoma's not doing everything that they possibly could be, if I'm saying that right. Um, so are there areas what's are there specific areas that you see room for improvement for people with disabilities and accessibility when it comes to voting?
Well, early voting, a lot of people choose to do early voting because they're concerned about either accessibility at their polling place or having to wait in lines. If there's somebody who can't wait in lines, if there's a line at the polling place. So if you do early voting, that's usually at your county election board. I've been pretty frustrated that our biggest counties, not all of them are having extra voting sites. So your early voting site might be pretty far away from you. We're trying to push them to have more sites for early voting, but at least your election board has it. That's an option. So this week, for instance, is Thursday, Friday, Saturday. That can be a good option for folks. The other would be mail-in ballots, and you can decide if you want a regular mail-in ballot or one they call an incapacitated ballot. Excuse the language, but that's what's in the law. So if you're a person with disability who can't get to the polls because of your disability, you can use what's called an incapacitated ballot. That's just what you request on the website, or you can do it via mail if you want, and they send it to you. So the two choices are a regular absentee ballot. You have to get a notary to verify your identity before you send it in. So Oklahoma has one of the toughest verification laws in the country. So that would be either having somebody come and verify it for you, or having to go somewhere, like go to your bank to get it notified. If you choose the absentee, that's for folks who are so-called incapacitated, you just have to have two witnesses. But the challenge with that is they can't be family members. So I know I've talked to people with disabilities who don't have transportation, and they're like, "Who am I supposed to have come sign this thing?" But you'd have to have neighbors or other folks sign that if you wanted to send it in. So that's how they verify identity. The biggest challenge is getting it in on time. So if you're doing a mail-in ballot in Oklahoma, it has to arrive by election day, and you don't want to push your luck on that. You'd want to get it in pretty early. So if you want to do mail-in ballots, you have to plan about 3 weeks out to get your ballot and to make sure it's back in on time. That's a big thing I would say. The other is just demanding that you be accommodated if you need to. I'll tell you a story. So a couple years ago, during it was the year after COVID um, first hit, there was an election in Oklahoma, and my husband got COVID, and he got tested positive maybe the day before. So it was too late to get an absentee ballot. And I know the law because I've been working on trying to improve the law. And so I knew that the polling workers have to be willing to come out to the car if you demand it for that purpose. So if you are unable to get in the polling location, um, I had to demand, like, I couldn't believe it. It was only because I'm a state legislator did I feel that confident. And so I hope people can feel a little more confident to demand what you need. But I said, no, I know that the law allows for this. He wants to vote. He cannot come in this polling location. He's going to get people sick. Um, and so they had to officially close down the polling location to go out and accommodate it. And the poll supervisor was so stressed out and kept reading the law again and again. And I just said, I know this is a law. And I honestly, I almost gave up. And I'm a darn elected official, right? So I think to feel more confident to demand what you need, and to trust that really, to me, poll workers should try to. Of course, they have to be fair and treat everyone the same, but they really should be offering to help people, and we want to make sure that they follow the law.
Beyond voting on election day, what are some ways that people with disabilities can stay engaged with their elected officials throughout the year?
If you're able to go to events, certainly going to any of your legislators' events. Like I have town halls, and I also have caucus events. This is how I got to know Miski. Really, I mean, not just partners in policymaking, also having community events. Um, because that's your chance to get more conversation happening. You can also ask for a meeting on a consistent basis. Now, they may not be willing to make that time, but if you said, "Hey, I want to meet with you before session starts," or "I want to meet with you a couple times a year and talk about issues we're having," that is a fair request. And you can decide if they'd say no, what you're going to put up with. But I think don't feel like you have to cover everything. Like, I know that when I was just an advocate before I got elected, I would worry about explaining the entire industry I worked in and all the issues related to it. And that's just not at all your job. Your job is really to remind them that you exist, that you're in their district, and that you're watching, and that you want them to think about you when they're making these decisions. So I would start with try to meet with them before session, whether that's phone, Zoom, in person, coffee, whatever that makes sense. And then I would say remind them. If you see bills that are filed that matter to you, remind them. If you see, the budget's going to matter. If there's something that you think that we should be spending more money on it, tell them so. You know, and I had people, they might meet with me ahead of time, but then they'll send me an email every now and then to remind me. And there's a big difference if I've already met them face to face when I get that email because I know who they are and I've seen them eyeball to eyeball. So I think you don't need to write someone every week, but like to check in every now and then and say I'm watching is worthwhile. If that's just you see that your legislator made a vote you like, send them an email and say, "Hey, thanks for voting yes on this." Like, that's a great way to connect. Then you're not always complaining,
Mm.
right? Or if you see, "Hey, I saw that the healthcare authority announced this, and I'm worried about that because 'cause that'll impact me." You don't even have to give them a specific ask of what they need to do next, but truly feel like it's a conversation, and they're more likely to treat you like they wanna hear from you.
Miski, do you wanna, pipe in on this? Because you've stayed active with your legislators
I just
since
didn't let them say
Partners in
no.
Policy.
Um, I just kept on and kept on, and, sometimes that's I no, I was really lucky that, and Senator Kurt's busy. I mean, she's busier than some because she's got extra, leadership responsibilities, and she's always made time, and sometimes it's quick, sometimes it's, we're passing in the hallway and we just have a quick second to say something fast. Um, but I also found out very early in my advocacy that the new people coming in, that's who you need. They need
Mhm,
you. They need you at that point because
mhm,
whatever shenanigans happen up at the Capitol your first year as a legislator, um, they don't tell them anything. Like they really don't help them much. I don't think they don't. It's almost kind of like high school initiation kind of stuff where, they kind of pick on them a little bit and so they need you to help them to give them information. And there were
mhm,
times that I had information, I knew things before she did, before my state rep did because she was new. It's her first year and she didn't know um a lot that was going on. So, um which I again, is a perfect time right now to get to know the candidates that are running, um, and then latch on to those, new people that come in that because they don't have training. They don't have any kind of classes about how does this work and what do I do? I mean, they just have to figure it out, which is crazy to me that we don't require any kind of or we don't even offer them any kind of guidance or, hopefully they find somebody um, that's been in there longer than them that will help kind of walk them through it or I don't really know how that works, but they don't have any kind of training. So, um, and I also think just staying connected, even if that's when you see like Senator Kurt said, whenever you see something that is going to affect you or you have a question about it, like what does this look like? What does this really mean? What's really happening? Um, just ask. I mean, that's their job. Like, they're there to represent you, and if they don't know what's going to affect you, if they don't know that you're concerned about something or because a lot of times even it's perspective. I think our Summer and I's, bill with PIP is a great example of that during our mock hearing, um, for partners in policymaking. It was actually a live bill that was going through it was moving through the, legislature at the time, and it was a potty training bill, for kids going into pre-K, and, we kinda went back and forth about what we thought about it, and we ended up saying, "No, we don't think this is a good idea. We think that this is gonna hurt people with disabilities." And I sat across the table from from Senator Kurt, and I will never forget the look on her face when she said, "I voted for that." Like,
mhm,
I didn't know. Like, I
mhm.
never thought about it like that. I heard from a lot of teachers, but I never heard from anybody with that perspective, but it makes a lot of sense. And so, even people who really are on your side and they really are even in the disability community, they don't always see it the way that it's going to affect you
Mhm.
or your life. So I think it's important to, stay connected and bring up those issues.
Yeah, and don't give up on people too, like, we can learn. I know that there's a lot of hard-headed people in elected
Unfortunately,
office, but
yes.
we can learn and grow, right?
Yeah,
Well,
and
and
I
I
think
also
it's
think that Rev Up is a great it provides a lot of going kind of back to the accessibility and just all of the different like ways you get information and all that. Rev Up is going to there will be coming soon a statewide coalition for Oklahoma, um, which is gonna be
Nice.
great. Something that we
Yes.
really, really need. There's a lot of interest, but nobody really, like, you know, gone full in to just dive in and do it. And so,
Let's go.
um,
Yep.
we are working on that now. But that provides a lot of, um, even funding for, potential transportation to get people to the polls and,
Yep.
um, you know, advocacy, sending out flyers and information. And there's just, um, so the opportunity is endless with them as far as, ways that we can be helpful, postcard campaigns and, facilitating some of those meetings or days at the Capitol that people can come and, um, have set up meetings, conversations with their, legislators. So, um, that's another, thing that I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about. Um, and the other thing I would say is that if every single one of us took one person with us to vote,
Mhm.
think about
Absolutely.
how that much that impacts numbers. I don't care how you vote, I just want you to go vote. I just want you to
Yes.
Yeah.
go there and do it,
Yeah.
um, responsibly. I mean, hopefully, you've educated yourself a little bit, but,
Yes.
um, that can completely change an entire election, just
Yeah.
Civic
taking one person
engagement
with
is
you.
huge for everyone. And, if they see people with disabilities doing it, they'll be like, oh, well, maybe they are more alike than they are different. And maybe one person's perception of people with disabilities might change. I'm not going to guarantee that it will, but you never know. It's worth a try.
Right.
One day at a time, right? Bryce,
I mean,
I'll let
I
you ask
actually
your
have a
that final question.
yes, I have actually a two-part question on this actually before I ask, the last question. Senator Kirk, what do you want your legacy to be?
Oof. That is
It's a
a
good
hard
one.
question. That was a really hard question. I, hmm, I'll be struggling with that this year because I have just one term left. I didn't get a race this year, so I'll be planning for my last 4 years. I mean, I hope I make some real change around affordable housing. Our state is way behind, and we really have to make some progress. And so I've been working on issues from the supply of affordable housing to eviction issues that are impacting a lot of folks across the state. I mean, the other big thing I'm working on really is on the election side, because we need a more balanced legislature. We are dangerously imbalanced with the way that we operate, and that causes a lot of problems in how thorough our decision making is. And I'm not talking about, even in this case, that one party's better than the other. But when you have 40 Republicans and 8 Democrats, you don't have a kind of balanced conversation happening in the building. So I worked really hard on recruiting candidates and supporting them to run. So I would love to see a real transformation of people with disabilities running. And
Yeah.
I know that's a huge ask and a huge burden. I met with someone this year about running who has intellectual disabilities. I think she would have been a glass ceiling breaker. Whether she won or not, I think it would have impacted our state. But she had some unique issues that were about needing transportation. And also, she really had to have her family's support because that's who was her primary guardian. And, there's additional barriers to running, but I think we really need to round the corner of having more lived experience in
Yeah.
office and not
Yes.
just family members of. We need people with
I would
disabilities because
love
I
to.
mean, I know I've lived it my whole life where I've watched, when my brother shows up places, how that changes the room, right?
Right.
I
Sure.
remember when he used to go out to concerts, he was a big music goer, and we would go to concerts when he was 18, 19, 20, 21. They there were no people in wheelchairs in that room, and so, like,
Right.
how do we change that in the state capitol? We're gonna have to help some people run. So, I, I know the Partners in Policymaking is, run by a state agency, so I can't go recruit directly from that list, but I want all the Partners in Policy alum to think about running for office, and I'd be glad to
Well,
help them think that through at whatever level.
I'd love to have a conversation with you about that because I've
Yeah.
thought about it myself running, to show people that just because you have a physical disability does not mean you cannot conquer the world. So I'd love to keep in
Right.
contact with you, Senator, and make
Yeah.
some things happen for sure. Trying to put the cart before the horse or the cart before the chair at least. But if you have any final comments or recommendations that you would want to give to our listeners before we sign off?
I mean, I would say be persistent, like Meske said. Like, I think that persistence matters, and unfortunately, this is not necessarily a your elected official. It may not be your buddy, but you need to push them to listen to you and care about what you do. And if you need help, take a friend. I strongly recommend going in pairs if you need assistance. But don't wait. I mean, this election year is incredibly important. There's huge decisions being made at the federal level that are going to put more decisions on our state. And so I think to be in touch with those folks early and often is
Sure.
absolutely worth your time. When I hear about decisions that could really undermine people's independence and people's access to the care they need, I get concerned, and we can't wait till those bills are already introduced to be pushing now.
One last, fun
Yeah,
fact that
go.
I wanna share with you guys. Um, Many accessibility features, that people use every day now, like, automatic doors and captions and voice to text and ramps, were originally designed to improve access for people with disabilities, but they benefit all of us now. In DC, something was brought up about people who use the bathroom stall in the bathroom. Everybody wants to go into that one, even if you don't have a disability, because it's bigger. You have more room. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? You're not
Unfortunately, yeah.
cramped, but we shouldn't be using those because that's for somebody with disabilities. But we use those things, and so think about those things whenever you're going through your daily life. Things that you see, the little lines on the parking spot that are right next to the handicap spot. That is, um, there for a reason. Like those they have to have the lift come out and they have to have that extra space. So don't park on the lines. Just little things like that that I think is important that um we all benefit from a lot of these things and we may not necessarily see it now, but like Summer said in the beginning, like there's not any studies that show that there's harm that's done to um anybody from being accommodating to everybody. So I think that that's a little bit of
Unfortunately,
everybody's responsibility to point those things out.
I saw that example at the zoo yesterday. I mean, on Sunday when I went with my family, I had to use the restroom, and somebody had used the handicap stall, so I had to use another restroom just because somebody, I guess, wanted more room. And my brother was like, somebody's in there that's not, I don't see a wheelchair or a walker or anything. I just, I don't see any accommodations. We're gonna have to use a you're gonna have to use another restroom. I'm like, "Oh, fantastic. This is exactly why I advocate for those things because it's ridiculous." I mean, I understand the more room and it's, the taboo behind it, I guess. I don't know, but it's it's frustrating. So, I get it. So, with that being said, we're about out of time for Where the Ramp Ends. Till next time, I'm Bryce,
And I'm Summer.
and this is Where the Ramp Ends and Where Your Journey Begins. Till next time, bye bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Those small actions make a big difference in helping others discover our podcast. We believe these conversations matter. By sharing stories, experiences, and perspectives from the disability community, we hope to increase awareness, understanding, and inclusion for people with disabilities and their families. Your support helps us continue this work and reach more listeners who need these conversations. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with a friend or on social media. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.